Mark Smith, you and I need to have a word. We need to have a serious conversation about your reffing duties going forward. Mark Smith, Marcus Smith, actually, Marcus Smith. Why did you stop that fight? I want a 12-page, 12-point font, Times New Roman, double spaced, with at least 4 citations, 4 cited sources as to why you felt justified in stopping that fight with Chris Curtis and Roman Kopylov. Right? Now, everybody's going to say, why are you mad? Why are you mad about the stoppage? Chris Curtis is going to lose anyway. We don't know that. You don't know. We've seen how judges score fights. Have you seen John Jones versus Dominic Reyes? And this fight was way closer. Chris Curtis was doing work in that 3rd round up until the knockdown. He was like, are we going to act like Chris Curtis didn't do work in the 3rd round, that someone could have watched it live and thought maybe give him the round and the knockdown doesn't have bearing on it? I'm just saying, is it likely? No. But do we actually know that it would have been the outcome? When we're talking about a fighter's, half of their paycheck is on the line. Mark Smith, I just feel like sometimes this dude loves getting himself involved in the fight. First of all, Mark, let's talk about the first infraction, right? Or 2, actually, right? In round 2, Chris Curtis is doing excellent work, especially to the body, starting to find a timing on Roman. And not only does he get low blowed, and he gets eye poked as well. You don't take a point. What are we doing? So what I'm hearing is, right, you get 2 free fouls on a fighter as long as they're different fouls. Oh, it's because it's not the same. If you eye poke somebody and you low blow them, no punishment. That's what I'm hearing. That's what I'm seeing. Right? And hopefully I'm not misremembering this, guys. And I don't even remember who the ref was for this fight. But do y'all remember? Now, I understand this was a more severe case, but remember when Figgy, in the first fight, Brandon Moreno, low blowed him? And I think that was the only foul at that point in the fight. But because it was deemed very impactful, they took a point from him, and that fight ends up becoming a draw. You're telling me watching Chris Curtis in that 2nd round, and everybody go watch it back. Chris Curtis is starting to speed up. He's starting to really get the timing. Roman is noticeably slowing down in the fight. Gets 2 rests in that round. Who knows what would have happened? Not saying Chris Curtis wins. Not saying he wins. But you got to make up for that. You got to take a point, bro. Because now what I'm seeing is you can foul somebody twice and just get away with it. So if you're losing the fight and you're getting tired, poke the guy in the eye, low blow him, you good. No biggie. Right? And actually, let's really think about this too. I know this is a different ref because I believe it was Jason Herzog. But Paulo Costa did a foul against Marvin Vettori. I know there's those shenanigans with the weight miss and everything, but that's before the fight. He did 1 foul, got a point taken immediately. Like, where is the consistency with when we take a point and when we don't? That's all I'm asking. I feel like no one's really asking these questions. Maybe they are, but people aren't asking them enough. In terms of Chris Curtis, I feel for him so much. I feel for Chris Curtis so much because Chris Curtis throughout his UFC career has time and time again has been screwed over. All right. Chris Curtis against Brendan Allen, his most recent fight, the rematch. If he does not blow out his hamstring, arguably probably wins that fight because in real time, it did look like maybe he got hurt by Brendan Allen or whatever, but it was an injury. Arguably could have won that fight against Brendan Allen, right? Imavov fight. He was losing that Imavov fight, no doubt. But the eye poke that happens to him, fight gets waved off, no contest. Who knows if he turns it around? Imavov is now fighting Israel Adesanya. Gets headbutted against Kelvin Gastelum. Gets knocked down because of it. And the judges don't get made aware of it. Nobody gets made aware of it because of the headbutt. And yet, people have the audacity to call Chris Curtis a crybaby when this dude has legitimately time and time again been done dirty throughout his time in the UFC. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of people labeling Chris Curtis as a crybaby when this guy has every justified reason to be upset. I'm tired of it. Right? Back to Mark Smith real quick. Mark Smith, I watched you with my own 2 eyes when Ihor, I can't remember his last name, but the Ukrainian fighter that was just fighting early in the prelims got knocked down, you gave him an entire 10 seconds to keep getting pounded in the face before you stopped the fight. There was 1 second left in the entire fight, not the round, the fight. 1 second left. Roman Kopylov walked away. You know what? Let me give y'all an example. Jalen Turner walked away from Renato Moicano. And what happened in that fight? Not saying, because obviously Chris Curtis can't come back and win the fight because the fight would have ended. But what I'm saying, though, is Jalen Turner, similar sequence, not a head kick, I believe it was a punch, but knocked down Renato Moicano. Moicano was like this. Fight doesn't get stopped. You gotta give, you owe it to the fighter, win or lose. When there's 1 second left in the entire fight, you owe it to them to see the scorecards. So win or lose at that point, Chris can feel however he wants to feel about it. It's not about saying that Chris would have won, but there's a certain duty as a ref. Obviously, you're there to protect the fighter. At the end of the day, yes, I'd rather there be an early stoppage than a late stoppage in the grand scheme of things. But this wasn't a fighter safety issue. Roman Kopylov is walking away from Chris Curtis, and there's 1 second left. And a part of me thinks if Roman actually did not walk away from Chris and would have stood over him and Chris just kind of like defends, the fight doesn't get stopped. I think personally, Mark Smith, when he saw Roman Kopylov walk away, he thought it was a walk-off KO type of situation. Like he thought this was a Max Holloway 2.0. I genuinely do think, because check this out. Another example was, this is a more graphic example, and I don't think it's a fair comparison, but it is somewhat comparable. Do y'all remember Jairzinho Rozenstruik against Alistair Overeem? Because Alistair Overeem was about to win the fight on the scorecards had he not gotten knocked down, his lip busted open. The reason I think that fight got stopped, though, largely part, obviously the lip looked bad, but Jairzinho walked away. If Jairzinho stands over Alistair and you don't see the lip and he's kind of like, trying to like finish him but not quite there, that fight maybe doesn't get stopped. Fighters are basically, the new meta is, if you drop somebody, you might be better off walking away from them because the ref might see you walk away and think, oh, this is over. But Mark Smith, man, I don't know what you saw in there. Now, maybe Chris Curtis had a look in his eye you didn't like. Maybe. But then here's where you're not excused. Every 10 seconds, last 10 seconds of a round, you always hear that person with the little clappy things go. And every time a ref hears it, they acknowledge it going, like, they hear it. So you knew. You can't say you ain't know. There was at least less than 10 seconds left in the fight. Maybe you didn't know there was 1 second left. Maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know. But you knew there was less than 10 seconds, Mark. Realistically, Roman Kopylov is standing 10,000 feet away from Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis is literally trying to stand up. You get in front of him. You literally stopped him from getting up. And you're going to, because that's what I feel like people are going to say. Oh, look how he fell over. He didn't get back up quick. You literally stopped him from getting up. And Mark, you know what, Mark? I don't even think you're the worst referee in the world. But man, you sure look like it, though. You sure did look like it in that moment. And here's the thing. This is a teaching moment. Right? This is a teaching moment. Mark, if you're going to stop that fight, you got to stop it as he's falling down. Because at that point, when he's sat up and he's trying to get up, you can't then step in. Like, that's the problem I feel like with some of these early stoppages. It may not even be that you're stopping it necessarily early, but you're stopping it at a time it doesn't make sense. Like, at that point, if you were willing to let him fall over and then turn around, and there's less than 10 seconds left in the fight, and Roman is posing no danger to him, you're not going to allow him the opportunity to get back up. No, in fact, let's talk about this. I don't remember who the ref was for this fight. Brian Ortega was getting pounded by Volkanovski after the failed submission attempt, and Volk is just His corner had to lift him up. He couldn't even get up on his own free will. He had to be lifted up by his coaches in that fight. Oh, that was Herb Dean ref in that fight. It was Herb Dean. But this is what I mean, though. Chris Curtis, man, I feel for Chris Curtis so much. He's one of my favorite fighters to watch in the UFC. I think he had such a great fight. And Roman proved me wrong. Roman is a lot better, man. He's a lot better than I even give him credit for. He is an excellent striker, and I can't wait to see him back in there again. But Chris Curtis, I heard he wants to go back down to 170. I think that's a good move. 170 was his weight class before he got into the UFC. 185, he may have a Joaquin Buckley revival. Because at the end of the day, people forget, man. He beat Joaquin Buckley. He knocked him out. I'm just putting that out there. Like, Chris Curtis has the skill set. And I think this is some of the best work I've seen from Chris Curtis throughout his entire time in the UFC, especially that second round. That second round, he was on point. He even started using kicks a lot more in his game to set up the boxing. And his footwork looked a lot less plotty, looked a lot better. But I'm just super upset for him. And I get his reaction was super warranted. And I feel like anybody that wants to call him a crybaby or say he's overreacting, y'all don't understand, man. These guys are fighting for half of their paycheck. And sometimes a TKO loss versus a decision loss on your record, depending on when you're trying to negotiate for your next fight, that means something, bro. But I hope Chris gets a good fight at 170. I hope that, he said he had no injuries. Hope he gets a decently, maybe he won't get a top 15 opponent at 170, but someone, solid. I can't think of a name off the top right now who I would want to see him fight at 170, but there's a lot of good matchups at 170 outside the top 15 he could fight. I don't know, like maybe if you're feeling, like something like a little spicy, maybe you go him versus Vicente Luque. I think that's someone who's in the top 15, but it's not, high-end top 15. You could do that fight. But, man, all I got to say, though, is Mark Smith. I understand it. You're trying to look out for the fighter. I'm not discounting that at all. But, bro, it was 1 second, and he wasn't even near him. But with that, though, Mark, I'm going to need that essay turned in first thing on Wednesday morning on my desk. And if it ain't there, we're going to have another conversation. Thank you.